Hi guys, here is a perfect example once again of why Keir Starmer and the Labour government need to implement media reform. So this is Christopher Hope. He's a journalist or reporter from GB News, and he posted this on social media, on Twitter to be exact. Okay, let's get into it. So it says here, the UK will be pressured next year to allow under 30s from the European Union to live and work in the UK as part of a deal to reset the UK-EU relationship. Okay, right off the bat, we have two problems. One which is involving what's included and the other what's not included. Notice the term pressured being used here. The UK is not being pressured to do anything. The EU is offering the UK a deal, and this deal would allow under 30s for a limited amount of time to come to the UK to live and work. And that part is correct. But there's no pressure being applied here. This is an offer that's on the table. Now, the part that's left out, of course, is that this would apply also to UK citizens. Young people under the age of 30 in the United Kingdom would be able to travel to the European Union for a limited amount of time, in the same way as the Europeans would be able to come to the UK. Now, why did Christopher, who's a journalist with GB News, not include this important information? Then he goes on to say, EU President Ursula von der Leyen will use a summit with Sir Keir Starmer in the new year to press the UK to allow freedom of movement for the under 30s, according to a senior EU diplomat. Okay, Ursula von der Leyen is not the EU president, we will leave that aside, it's not that important. But the other part, freedom of movement. This is not freedom of movement. I've been saying this I don't know how many times. Freedom of movement is something completely different. This is a limited scheme for people under the age of 30 for a limited amount of time. Freedom of movement allows people to move to the UK indefinitely. That's not freedom of movement what's been talked about here. In order to have freedom of movement, the UK would have to be a member of the European Union or something close to that. And there's nothing like that on the table on either side at the moment. Now, could it happen in the future? Yes, it's possible. Anything could happen in the future. Boris Johnson could become an MP in the future. Nigel Farage could become Prime Minister in the future. But at the moment, we're not talking about the UK rejoining the European Union, and we're not talking about freedom of movement. Okay, the rest of the tweet is just fine. Now, there are two possibilities here. First, Christopher Hope doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. The second is that this is slightly malicious. The former could be ignored as poor journalism, while the latter, well, Christopher Hope is a brexiteer. And he works for GB News, which is a pro-Brexit outlet. So it's probably more likely that he wants people to be convinced that this is bad news. The UK is getting back into the EU via the back door. He's going to bring back, so Keir Starmer in this case, is going to bring back freedom of movement. You can see here the mention of freedom of movement here, although it's limited to people under the age of 30. Of course, this is not freedom of movement. This is nothing like freedom of movement, but people watching GB News would not know the difference. The likes of GB News constantly bang on about how Keir Starmer is a Ramoner and Keir Starmer wanted another referendum and Keir Starmer is pro-European. So obviously this fits into their narrative, or this fits into the idea that, look, there are some people who were not happy with the Brexit referendum, not happy with Brexit, and they want to undo it. And now their guy, Keir Starmer, is in charge, and what is he doing? He's trying to cozy up to the European Union. However, a big problem for Christopher Hope and GB News is that support for Brexit is on the decline, and support for rejoining the European Union, or at least the single market, is increasing, and it's increasing by the year. What's also shocking is that there is growing support within Reform UK, and what I'm talking about within Reform UK, I'm talking about voters. There's growing support amongst them for the UK to rejoin the single market, even if it includes allowing freedom of movement. Now, it's not a majority, it's less than 50%, but it's growing, which means even people who vote for Nigel Farage or think Nigel Farage should be Prime Minister support the idea of a better relationship with the European Union, which is probably difficult for people like Christopher Hope to hear. Let me know in the comment section, guys, what you think. As always, your comments are greatly appreciated. Thanks a lot.